Welcome to this program of the International Alliance of the North American Unitarian Association, NAUA. NAUA is dedicated to supporting and promoting the practice of liberal religion by embracing freedom, reason, and tolerance, rooted in our commitment to the inherent worth and dignity of all people and every person. My name is Stephen Palmer, and I will be your host for this program. It is through the International Alliance that NAUA supports and promotes liberal religion throughout the world. For this program today, we have participants from across 13 time zones, from Hawaii to Greece. Our speaker today is the Reverend Andrew James Brown, minister of the Cambridge Unitarian Church in Cambridge, England. Andrew originally trained as a musician and then worked for 20 years as a professional jazz and rock double and electric bassist. Always interested in philosophy and theology, between 1997 and 2000, he studied theology at Oxford University while training for the ministry of the General Assembly of Unitarian and Free Christian Churches. Immediately after this, he became the minister of Cambridge Unitarian Church, where he still serves. Having a decades-long interest in Japanese philosophy and religion led Andrew to spend the last 2 years working on a project to translate the surviving essays of Imaoka Shin'ichiro, the important 20th century Japanese Unitarian educator known as, quote, the Emerson of Japan. Imaoka-sensei was an advocate of a creative, inquiring, free, liberative religion and spirituality. Participating in this program with Andrew as a special guest is Professor George M. Williams, president of the International Association for Religious Freedom, IARF. George is a retired historian of religions, having spent a lifetime studying religions that liberate. He has written books and made videos about the Hindu Renaissance, religion in modern Japan, and religion in Hawaii. A professor emeritus at California State University, he also holds 2 honorary doctorates, one from the Starr King School for the Ministry, and another from the United Protestant Theological School of Cluj-Kołobrzeg in Romania. George now lives in Hawaii, is a kapuna or elder in the Kananui Kea, the 1,000-year-old indigenous Hawaiian faith. George had the good fortune of personally knowing Reverend Dr. Imaoka Shin'ichiro and spent hundreds of hours with him during the last 7 years of his life. In 2019, George completed Cosmic Sage, a book about Imaoka-sensei's life, philosophy, theology, and concept of free religion. George will be participating in the question and answer part of this program. So without further ado, I turn the program over to our speaker, Reverend Andrew James Brown, for his presentation entitled Beyond All Isms, the Creative, Inquiring, Free, and Liberative Spirituality of Imaoka Shin'ichiro. Andrew, it's yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stephen. Excuse me. And also to the NUA, and also, of course, to all of you who've turned up. It's just wonderful to have you here. Thank you very much. That's terrific. But also, a big thanks must go to George Williams, Professor George Williams, because without his important work I'm going to get rid of that frog in my throat. Hang on. There you go. That should be much better. So George, without George's really groundbreaking work over many years, I wouldn't have been able to come across Imaoka Shin'ichiro, and without his help, I wouldn't have been able to get this project to where it is. So thank you, George, particularly for that. So thank you for asking me to talk tonight about Imaoka Shin'ichiro, and in particular, to introduce you to his basic understanding of something he called jiyu shukyo. That's spelt Jiyu, jiyu, shukyo, shukyo, jiyu shukyo. It can be translated as meaning simply free religion, but which is better translated much more discursively as a creative, inquiring, free and liberative religion or spirituality. It's a bit of a mouthful, but this jiyu bit, the free bit, is a complex word, so it doesn't simply mean free in the way we often understand it, but it also has this liberative quality and the quality of non-attachment, particularly to doctrines and so on and so forth. So I'm going to spend the latter part of my short talk, lasts about half an hour, but I'm going to spend the latter part talking briefly to introduce you to this ever-developing series of principles of living or statements of faith, which will, I hope, offer you a way of seeing how they, or at least something very like them, may help those of us associated with the Unitarian movement move beyond the significant limitations of historic Unitarianism, indeed beyond any isms. It's the ism bit that's of concern here. To move beyond it so as to become the kind of genuinely liberative spiritual movement I think it could, and indeed, in my opinion, should become. But before we look at two of these principles and statements, it's important to begin by giving you a brief overview of Imaoka Shin'ichiro's extraordinary 106-year-long life. So to begin, to help you keep him in mind, I've got just three pictures to begin with. This is Imaoka-sensei in 1930. So in terms of his whole life, he's still a young man, but of course he's 50 at this point. So this is him as a younger man. The second picture, 35 years later, as you can see, standing in front of his wife's company. She was a remarkable figure in her own right, and maybe one day some work will be done on her extraordinary life. But this is Imaoka-sensei standing in front of that building after receiving a 1965 Imperial Award. And then the final picture is Imaoka-sensei at his desk in 1985 when he was 104 years old and still working. So there you are. You have a little picture in your mind. He was born on September the 16th, 1881, into a traditional Pure Land Jodo Shinshu Buddhist family, and in his teenage years he converted to an Anglican form of Christianity. Eventually he found this too narrow, and he slowly became involved with the more liberal Congregational Church. Eventually, in 1906, he was called to the Congregational Church in Kobe to become its pastor. But a spiritual crisis occurred when he realized he couldn't convert others from their faith to Christianity. His own theology was eventually found heterodox by an ordination committee, and so he resigned and went back to Tokyo in 1910. There he met the important non-sectarian religious thinker, practitioner, and founder of the Itoen community, Tenko Nishida, better known as Tenko-san. And through him, he met Okada Torajiro, who brought a simple form of quiet sitting meditation into the picture. This is called Seiza. That simply means quiet sitting. This became Imaoka Sensei's central lifelong practice, and also that of many of those associated with the Japanese Unitarian movement. Incidentally, if you ever want to know how to practice that simple form, just be back in touch some other time. Eventually, the most progressive wing of Japanese congregational ministers began gathering in Tokyo. Imaoka Sensei joined them, and they became the heart of the Japanese Unitarian Mission, both at the nation's most influential religious and cultural journal, Cosmos, and also at Unity Hall, the headquarters of the Japanese Unitarian Association, which he formally joined in 1916 and eventually became its last secretary. And again, to give you a little idea of this, here is the wonderful building. It's called the Uitsukan, and this is a wooden building. It survived right up until actually the beginning of the Second World War, although it wasn't in Unitarian hands by that time. That's the building. The top picture is of its an earlier building, I think. I don't think that's part of the original, the building you've just seen, but this is part of the institution which they called the Advanced Studies School. So Unitarians were already teaching in Tokyo, and so this is an earlier building. But here is the entrance hall to that beautiful building. When we get to the main hall, which is the last picture of this little section, that's on the top floor. So you would have gone up those stairs there and then gone back up, and then the building that we'll see, or the room we'll see, is on the left. So that's... Here we have one of the lecture rooms, very plain. Here's the library and reading room. And lastly, here's the hall. Here's the main hall. If I zoom into the lettering, it says it's old Japanese or old Chinese characters, kanji. It says peace, righteousness, and truth. And then up above here is some hand calligraphy of an important early Japanese supporter of the Unitarian movement, and that simply says the Uitsu-kwan, so the Unity Hall. That's what that says. So there's the building. Now, between 1904 and 1906, he studied at Tokyo Imperial University, where he was taught by the important professor of comparative religions, Anosaki Masaharu. And it was with Anosaki Sensei that he went to Harvard University between 1915 and 1916, both as his assistant and also to study himself at the Divinity School. During the same period, he translated into Japanese R.J. Campbell's New Theology and Rudolf Eucken's Ethics and Modern Thought. With the collapse and dispersal of the Japanese Unitarian movement in 1922, and George can speak well to this, but this was a situation, alas, caused primarily by the American Unitarian Association's astonishingly negative and ultimately highly damaging attitude towards the Japanese Unitarian Mission. It was a very complex period of history, and there's some interesting things to say about that, but it's less relevant here. But because of that, Imaoka Sensei was forced to leave behind any idea of pursuing a formal religious ministry, and so began his journey towards life as an educator. Imaoka Sensei lectured from 1919 to 1936 at Nihon University on the history of religions and the outline of Christianity. And during that time, in 1925, he accepted the principalship of Saisoku High School, And within 15 years, Imaoka had helped turn it into a symbol of academic excellence in private education for all of Japan. Between 1932 and 1940, he worked with the American journalist and author J.W.T. Mason, studying Shinto. And he translated into Japanese 2 of Mason's books on Shinto, which are still in print today. It's interesting and important to know that both Imaoka-sensei and Mason were very knowledgeable about Henri Bergson's philosophy, and their interpretation of the meaning of Shinto owed much to the kind of thinking found in Bergson's creative evolution. Indeed, so much so that Mason once even said that Bergson's élan vital was a French version of the Shinto spirit. So there's an interesting cross-cultural encounter. As a committed liberal free religious person, it's only natural that the run-up to and including the period of the Pacific War between 1941 and 1945 was an extremely difficult time for him and liberal religion and education in general. This was because the extreme right-wing ethno-religious nationalism of the then current Japanese regime had little time for such a liberal, eclectic, and cosmopolitan approach to the world. But despite these dark years, in 1948, 3 years after the end of the war, he was able to found the Tokyo Kiitsu Kyokai, which was both a rebirth and a radical free religious reimagining of the earlier Japanese Unitarian movement. Now, Kiitsu, 2 characters, ki and itsu, means returning to one. So that's often where you get the Unitarian translation. Kiitsu means returning to one, and kyokai means church, or a sort of meeting house or fellowship. Although the old style characters Imaoka-sensei used to write kyokai were an attempt by him to indicate to those who could read it that this was a religious fellowship that was much more than simply a Christian church, but something considerably more expansive. But we'll come to that in a moment. In the same year, 1948, with Shigetaro Akashi and Hideo Kishimoto, he founded the Japan Free Religion Association and also joined the institution or the association that we now know as the International Association for Religious Freedom, the IARF. It's also important to note that in the following year, 1949, under his principalship, the Board of Trustees of the Seisoku Academy resolved to base, quote, all educational activities at the Academy on free religion, jiyu shukyo, unquote. Although it was related to the earlier interfaith study group, also called Kiitsu Kyokai, it gets a bit confusing here, the early one back in the 20s, they translated that into English as the Association Concordia. Concordia is the Kiitsu bit. The new Tokyo Unitarian Church, or Tokyo Unitarian Fellowship, the Tokyo Kiitsu Kyokai, in 1948 was nothing less than a gathering for the practice and study of free religion, jiyu shukyo. And within it, Imaoka-sensei constantly taught that free religion was something more than any particular religion. Again, we'll come to that in a little bit. Just as a matter of interest, you may like to see this photograph. I think George must have taken this. Maybe he can tell us at the end. That's the notice board. That was the modern notice board. So at the top here, you've got the Japan Free Religious Association. And then the middle bit this is Tokyo, the first 2 characters there. And you can see these 4 characters here. That's ki, itsu, 1, returning to 1, kyo, kai. That's the church or fellowship bit. So there you are. There's the notice board. For Imaoka-sensei and the Tokyo Kyetsu Kyokai, free religion was not limited to organized religions, the organized extant religions. And it was a way of being in the world which helped those who were members of the previous Japanese Unitarian Association to go beyond historic Unitarianism. Remember, it's the ism bit that we're talking about here, and indeed beyond any ism. As he made it clear to an IARF meeting in 1948, quote, "Free religion is not a new religion which conflicts with Christianity, Buddhism, or any of the other established religions, nor is it trying to unite all the established religions. It maintains that no established religion has a monopoly on truth, and that any established religion can become free religion if it is humble and anxious to learn truths which are proclaimed by others. The essence of free religion is the unification of pure religion and complete freedom. Or, to put it another way, free religion does not lie in doctrines or in rituals, but in the manifestation of creative and universal human nature. Accordingly, free religion extends to such worldly affairs as politics, economy, and science, etc., if they are manifestations of genuine human nature. In other words, they are unorganized religions." Unquote. But please note he says unorganized, not disorganized. Having sat with his writings for a long time now, I take it that what he's basically resisting here is the idea that free religion could or ever should be organized along traditional denominational lines, and that therefore any networking together of free religious individuals, jiyu shukyojin is how he would call it, and free religious communities, kyokai, needs always to be of a different, looser and liberative kind that he hoped could be found in some kind of international association of free religion. So I think association rather than denomination. Imaoka Sensei's quiet but profoundly radical work was publicly recognized in several ways. In 1950 and 1965, the Emperor honored him with awards for his services to education. In 1972, Meadville Theological Seminary granted him a Doctor of Divinity degree. In 1979, the World Conference on Religion and Peace recognized his leadership with the Distinguished Founders Award. And in 1981, the International Association for Religious Freedom, at its Congress in Holland, presented to his son and daughter-in-law an award for his outstanding contribution to interfaith understanding and cooperation. In 1974 and 75, the Japanese nation heard his talks on radio and television. And in 1981, the Japan Free Religious Association published 109 of more than 150 surviving essays. And I'm pleased to say that I've just finished a first draft translation of this book, and George Williams and I have hopes that soon some of these, and perhaps eventually all, will be published. You have a few of them that I sent out with this. Astonishingly, Imaoka Sensei was still actively engaged in ministry and continued regularly to attend and address the Tokyo Kyetsu Kyokai until 1986, aged 104. But finally, in the early part of 1988, he became ill, and on April the 11th, 1988, this apostle of free religion, known as a Bodhisattva, Kami, Christian and Unitarian sage, sometimes called the Emerson of Japan, died of pneumonia at the age of 106. So now I want briefly to introduce you to the basic outlines of his understanding of in what consists Jiyu Shukyo, this free religion. And then we'll be ready to share an open conversation together about the possible implications of this in your own context. And that, I think, is the really fun part, hopefully, of this evening's talk and conversation, because Imaoka Shin'ichiro was always very concerned to ensure that whatever free religion was, it should flourish in particular places. He's always trying to balance this sense of there being some kind of universal which holds us, but that this can only ever be expressed in particulars. So it would be lovely to hear your own particulars and particular expressions. That's the fun bit. So every year on or around the new year, he would revisit and redraft what he called his principles of living or statement of faith. A number of these have survived, but today I'm only going to very briefly introduce you to two of them. The 1973 version, because it became customary for the members of the Tokyo Kietsu Kyokai to recite this version together on a Sunday morning. And then to conclude, I'll finish by showing you the last version of these principles, calls it a statement of faith here, the additional notes to which he wrote on January the 1st, 1983, when he was 101 years old, 101. So back to the screen share. And I will just conversationally walk you through this. Hopefully you've got access to this document. I got it earlier, but so these are the principles of living, August 1973, used in his own Tokyo Kietsu Kyokai. You'll notice that these first three are all held together in the fourth. He then expands it. But so 1, I have faith in myself. I recognize my own subjectivity and creativity and feel the worth of living in life. I've just noted the end bit there, ikigai. If you do an internet search these days, ikigai is all over the place. It's the word of the moment. There's lots of stuff being written about this, the worth of living in life, ikigai. In later, when we get to the last one, you'll see he adds here after subjectivity and creativity, sociality. He adds that later on. He goes on, subjectivity and creativity can be translated or replaced with personality, divinity, and Buddha nature. So that's this idea that the self are these interconnected things themselves. 2, I have faith in my neighbor. A neighbor is oneself as a neighbor. If I have faith in myself, I inevitably have faith in my neighbor. So that's, even as he has that in the turn to the importance of the individual and the self, that very turn immediately turns outward, because what we have in ourselves is what we recognize in the other. So it's not that inward looking sense of individuality, it's simultaneously inward and outward. And because of that, we get to 3, I have faith in a cooperative society. Both oneself and a neighbor, while each possessing a unique personality, are not things that exist in isolation. Because of this uniqueness, a true interdependence, true solidarity, and true human love are established, and therein a cooperative society is realized. And that runs into the 4 statements. I have faith in the trinity of self, neighbor, and cooperative society. The self, neighbor, and cooperative society, while each having a unique personality, are entirely one. Therefore, there's no differentiation of precedence or superiority, inferiority between them, and one always contains the other. So do hold that in mind. Whenever Imaoka Shin'ichiro, Imaoka-sensei is talking about self, he's also talking about other and cooperative society. When he's talking about the other, you get the idea. When he's talking about cooperative society, it's all 3 at once. But he adds a 5th one in this iteration, which is I have faith in the unity of life and nature. Life which constitutes the trinity of self, neighbor, and cooperative society further unites with all things in the universe. So he's very early on recognizing that whatever humankind and human community is, it's absolutely wrapped up in the whole. 6, I have faith in the church. Now, remember what I said earlier. This is kyokai. When it uses these two characters here in Japanese, most Japanese people hear that as church, meaning a Christian church. I'll make it a bit bigger. There you go. They mostly hear that as meaning Christian church. It can be applied actually to other religious communities as well. There's a couple of Buddhist temples that use this. This is the sort of teaching, and this is the meeting house. You can see it's a little house. But Imaoka Shin'ichiro decided to use an ancient, old character. This is a much older Japanese character to render kai. So you've got kyo, meaning teaching, kai. So the word both, it says kyokai in both occasions. But the idea, or he hoped for using these older characters, that it would give this sense of being more than simply a Christian church. It was a broader house of learning and cooperative living and so on. Kyokai. So the church, kyokai, is the prototype and archetype and driving force of the cooperative society. I can only be myself by being a member of the church. 7, I have faith in a specific religion. In other words, I'm a member of the Tokyo Kyetsu Kyokai. However, a specific religion, including the Tokyo Kyetsu Kyokai, neither monopolizes religious truth, nor is it the ultimate embodiment of it. He returns to this again and again. And lastly, I have faith in free religion, jiyu shukyo. While having faith in a specific religion, the endless pursuit and improvement towards universal and ultimate truth is the core of religious life. Such a dynamic religion is called free religion. Notice the language of creativity and dynamism. He gets that from, I think he's drawing a lot of that from Bergson. Okay, so that's it in 1973. In the larger document you may have read earlier, there's an interview with Professor Wakimoto where he unfolds these 8 points a bit further, and maybe we can talk about that later. But here's the 1983 one. This is his type. He typed this. And you can see that it's compressed. Is that good? Is that bad? As examiners love to say, discuss. Has he made things clearer or obscured things? Again, discuss. It's interesting. But what is important to note is that he wrote this copy in English. The other one was in Japanese. And it was designed to be given to an English-speaking audience at the IARF. So I think that's worth noting. Much more compressed. I believe in self. Awaken to the autonomy, sociality, there it is, it's been added. Awaken to the autonomy, sociality, and creativity within me, I find my daily life worth living. Autonomy, sociality, and creativity may be called personality, divinity, and Buddhahood. I think autonomy, they are joined together. Autonomy goes with personality, sociality goes with divinity, creativity goes with Buddhahood. I think there's something going on there. Not entirely sure yet. Well, there is, but I'm not sure whether the relationships are that close, are direct. 2, I believe in others. Because of my belief in self, I cannot but help believe in others who have their own selves as neighbors. 3, I believe in community. Both myself and other selves are unique, but not absolutely distinct from each other. Hence, solidarity, fellowship, and community will be realized. There's his Trinity. 4, I believe in the cosmic community. Here's his enlargement. Not only self, others, and community, but all nature in addition are one and constitute the cosmic community. And then finally, 5, I believe in the church. Again, we've got that translation problem there. He's got in mind kyokai. This interesting thing. He can write it in kanji. He can express it in kanji, but we've got the word church, so he uses church. The church epitomizes the cosmic community, and I will be a cosmic man, cosmic human by joining the church. Right, we're drawing to a close, but I thought just before my final paragraphs, you'd love to see some of dear Imaoka Shinichiro's own handwriting. If my handwriting is this good aged 101, I shall be very pleased. These are notes that he adds to that statement, and I'll simply read them out without much comment. 1, free religion is not a ready-made religion and has not a creed nor a dogma, except a tentative statement. He loves the word tentative and provisional. 2, particular religion is free religion if it does not insist on a monopoly of truth and applies itself diligently to seek after truth in others too. 3, free religion is neither a new religion that unifies all particular religions, nor a new religion that competes with particular religions, but is within particular religions as their essence. 4, because I and others are not quite independent of each other and form a community, free religion is both individual and community religion. For those of you sensitive to Unitarian history, community religion, that's John Hayes Holmes's community church. That's a direct influence going on there. He was a great admirer of John Hayes Holmes' work. 5, because free religion is nothing but the realization of the pure and genuine human nature consisting of autonomy, creativity, and sociality, all human activities, politics, economy, education, art, labor, and even domestic affairs are also free religion, as much as they are also realization of the same fundamental human nature. There is no fundamental distinction between the sacred and the secular. And lastly, free religion is more than the cooperation of religions and the world peace movement. He signs it in the Western way, Shinichiro Imaoka. Imaoka is his family name. January 1st, 1983. Right, I'm coming to the very end. Through these always tentative and provisional statements, and of course his other writings, the extent of his concerns about ecology, equity, education, social consciousness, world peace and community, local, national and international, are constantly revealed. These were the basic elements of the Japanese Unitarian movement from the time of his involvement with Unity Hall in the 1910s, right the way through to his death in 1988. He firmly believed that his intra and interfaith conversations and encounters were processes of growth and maturation, a series of transformations as if towards a center, towards an integral personality that in his last years he called a cosmic human being. And this attitude, this disposition towards living an always evolving creative life, was summed up in one of his most memorable sayings that was very well known and much loved by all the members of the Tokyo Kietsu Kyokai. I have his calligraphy for you here. There you are. This is his name on the left. This is Imaoka Shin'ichiro. There's that little ich, as in, single. And it says, in the University of Life, there is no graduation. That was repeated all the time in religion and education for him. So although in his last extant statement of faith, we just heard, there's no mention of God, and so is technically speaking non-theistic, In truth, that which humans have felt could be called divine and sacred, and at times given the name Kami or God. All of that had become his whole life. And he experienced the divine and sacred not in any otherworldly realm or abstract absolutes, but only in those images, symbols, and practical examples that evoked and gestured towards creative freedom and liberation of an evolving humanity, a striving together for unity, kiitsu, in its diversity. But it's vital to see that even the idea of freedom he did not consider as an absolute, because he knew it could only be sought together in community, kyokai. So he was always seeking it, something high. He was always seeking something higher, more beautiful, truer, and better, namely this creative, inquiring, free and liberative religion, this jiyu shukyo, that went beyond any old style of denominational thinking and any ism, even the Unitarianism that helped him on his way back in the 1910s and 20s. And that will do for me. I hope that was of some use and interest. Thank you.
Well, thank you very, very much. I think you've given us a huge amount to think about. And we will go into a question and answer session in a moment. Terry, if I could we want to give Andrew a moment to catch his breath. And if I could have the second slide, I just wanted to make the audience aware of some of the programs, other programs that will be coming up very shortly, sponsored by the North American Unitarian Association. On this coming Tuesday, the NAUA Academy will be providing a program on overcoming identity politics in North America. It will be a description of the organization FAIR and their work by Sunil Wijesekera, who is a member of our Hayward Fellowship. Then there will be a monthly worship service on the 16th by Reverend Todd Eckloff. And then the Academy program for December, I think, will be very, very interesting. It is by Reverend Peter Morales, former president of the UUA, and his provocative title is Liberal Religion, Is It Time for Hospice? And then in the beginning of January, we haven't determined the exact date, we'll be starting a multi-session course led by Marga Hanna from Vancouver, one of our members, actually a new board member. And that will be on mythology now and then. How can it inform our future? So lots of interesting programs coming up very soon. So now we'll move into our question and answer part. And after we're finished with that, we will have some breakout rooms so that smaller groups can get together and discuss what you've heard and also just get to know each other better. To do the question and answer, Andrew will be calling on people to ask a question. Use the reaction button on the bottom of your screen. It's a little heart that says react, and if you press that, it will say raise hand. And when you're finished, there you'll get a little sign that says lower hand. So Andrew will be calling on people. He will perhaps defer a number of the questions to George or bring him into this discussion. And uh, the other thing is, if you do not want to be seen to ask a question for whatever reason, you may put it in the chat, and I will monitor the chat and ask the question for you. So without any further ado, let's let Andrew take over on this question and answer session. I think you have some questions.
Splendid.
And there's
Yeah.
as well.
So let me maybe unspotlight, then I can see everybody. Hang on. Can we all unspot? Do we get how do we do it?
I think
Can you help Terry so I can see everybody?
we want gallery view.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Then I can thank you. Right, who fancies going first? Well, may with your permission, everybody, may I ask George, because George knew him. He might wish to add a clarificatory point or an extra point here. You might not, George, but would you like to add anything since you knew the man?
Let's just praise. It is extraordinary to have such a partner in the study of Imaoka and free religion, and to finally see worldwide interest, first in the IARF and now with you in the NAUA. This is just thrilling for me. And Andrew has just done a fantastic job, especially these last 2 years, as he's worked in translating the 109 documents that were preserved on Imaoka-sensei's 99th year for his 100th birthday. So I'll just say only that. Andrew, again, thank you.
Well, thank you. So, who fancies?
Okay, I think Alan Lindrup has his hand up. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's quite hard to see on my screen. If you see something, Stephen, please jump in. Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, Alan.
Yeah. So one more substantive question and one that's more, I guess, technical. So I'll go with the substantive one first, which is, he appears to be issuing, you said, an almost annual revision of these statements of which could be principles of living or statement of faith, and seems to different title but similar listings. And we have the last one being the 1983 version. Is it, when he makes a change like this, and like it reduces from 8 to 5, the main points he's trying to make, is he saying that the ones that are no longer included are either subsumed already in one of the other ones, or are they ones that are no longer as important? So that is kind of what I'm trying to get at there. Yeah. And the second point, which is the technical thing, was just the reference to sensei. I'm gathering that that's a reference that's kind of the equivalent of wise elder or some other similar nomenclature that indicates a certain reverence for an individual of who's been well studied and developed a great wisdom through time. But I'm that's my guess. So I'm just asking what that means. So that's it.
Great. Now those are both great questions. Thank you. So I'll start with sensei, because sensei simply has the simplest meaning of teacher in it, and since he was a headmaster, I mean, the word sensei will be used of any teacher in that setting, so it has that straightforward sense of teacher, but it also has that slightly more honorific weight, that this is someone that you recognize they have wisdom and knowledge that's better than you at that moment. So it's that kind. But Imaoka-sensei, so I'm using it in both senses here, he was always clear that the best teachers are those who encourage their students to improve and be better than them. He repeatedly talks about that. And one of the difficulties that George found when he was trying to write the biography of Imaoka-sensei was that that's exactly how Imaoka-sensei worked. He never talked about himself. He was always pointing to these people, the people he taught and engaged with, and said, well, you know, they've done the great stuff. So that's what teacher means in that, sensei means in that sense. I hope that's helpful. And then the other thing to say is that these statements of faith, it's 90, well, with the one exception of the first one I gave you, the 1973 statements of faith, these were written for himself. So we shouldn't see them as being public pronouncements. Sorry, both of these have got a public space. But basically, the ones he wrote, they're mostly for his own purposes of self-reflection. But the ones I chose were the ones that he developed for his church and then his church adopted. And then the last one, of course, he chose to offer to a mostly Western European, North American audience at the IARF. So the status of those two statements that you heard were slightly different in that they became public. But I don't think it's right to see one as simply replacing the other. Hold on to that thought of his calligraphy of, in the University of Life, there is no graduation. It's best to see all of these things as interconnected and as part of an ongoing conversation. It's not that he rejected the earlier ones. It's simply that in 1983, he felt the best way to express what he was trying to say was like this rather than like that. And because he always attached those words of tentative or provisional, he was also, I think, trying to encourage anyone who read it, including himself, that, okay, this is where I am at the moment, but let's continue this process. So it's a sort of, I suppose it's a sort of non-answer in that it's, what can we say? We can say the last one was the last one he wrote, but who knows? 2 years later, he may have reintroduced some of those ideas. All I will say to finish is that everything that turns up in those earlier statements of faith does continue to play as themes in his overall work. So he never throws anything out absolutely. So there's never a graduation. There's never a single graduation. It's always an ongoing learning, reiteration, reshaping. I'm a jazz musician, as you know. We play over the same tunes hundreds of times. It's a bit like an improvised jazz solo over, I don't know, something like Autumn Leaves. You know, what's great on one day, I could do better next time. Oh, okay, well, let's try it this way. I think it's more like that. That'll do. Sorry, yeah, I can't see hands. I do need your hands, Steve. Help, Stephen.
Okay, there's George is raising his hand, and I actually had my hand up as well. I don't see anyone else's hand up at the moment. So George, go ahead, and I have a question after that. George?
I would have one other thing. Imaoka always said when he wrote these, what have I learned this year? Because he valued learning as the primary thing that distinguishes someone moving toward becoming a human being. He privileged the word human being. He even chuckled and said, I'm not one yet, but I'm trying to become a human being. And he thought our potential as humans was far more than we ordinarily do. And expanding the idea of the University of Life, he talked about each of our schools that we have been in, that we've graduated from, and the diplomas that we get. We don't have to tear any of those up, because they're the foundations for the next year. So each of these statements is actually the focus for the next year, what I've learned this year and what I'm working on and what I'm growing toward to become a human being in community, because he believed that we can only become human as others become free as well, liberated as well.
Thank you, George. I think John Eckroyd from France has his hands up, his one hand up at least. Go ahead, John. You're muted, John.
It's the sound of one Zoom hand
You
clapping.
did that do it? Yes.
Yes.
I don't know exactly how to frame this question. I'm sure that others can frame it better than me. One of the difficulties that I've had with my Unitarian faith over the last 50 years and working with Unitarian communities is how to bring freedom into perspective so that those who are in our communities can find the content and the meaning and the purpose of their lives. That is, there's a tension in our communities, the communities that I've been in, and I've been in quite a few here in France, internationally, and in the United States. And I've found systematically that tension between the freedom and the need to develop myself and for others to develop themselves as persons, as selves. And the tension that I've found over the last 60 years in our faith is that we're quite strong on freedom, on free spiritual growth, but that the coherence of the content of our faith is so loose that in practice we have a lot of trouble in our communities finding ways in which to bring young people and more mature people into focus for themselves and for others, so that who they are and where they're going and what they want to do focuses spiritually for themselves, not just ethically, which is what we usually have in our principles. And so that the frustration, I'll stop there, but the frustration that I felt over the last 50 years in our communities is that the development of character, the development of personality, the development of content, the development of human beings, the development of who we are, it's difficult to find that in communities that worship freedom, and by simplifying it. And so I think he's probably tackled the issue very in a focused way from his Japanese culture. My question is how do we relate that to our Western culture?
No, it's a great question. Thank you. There's no simple answer to this, of course. There's a complex question, but I think what I would say first of all, and I realize you're improvising a talk, so you made up when you said worship freedom. I think that's definitely been one of the problems that's been in an Enlightenment formed religion. There's no doubt about that. Let's say, I mean, I value the aims of the Enlightenment, but the aims of the Enlightenment have got themselves a bit caught up in some interesting, what should we call them, possible cul-de-sacs. But Imaoka Shin'ichiro didn't worship freedom. And that's, I think, the theological strength of his principles, starting with this Trinity, or he also called it a quaternity, because it gets expanded to the whole of life and nature, is that you can't worship freedom. Your very individuality, which is so important, it's the only place you can start, is only possible because of your neighbor. And because it's only possible because of your neighbor, that very freedom to be the individual relies upon the cooperative community. And so it never, ever rests with simple personal development, self-development. If it does, it's a solipsistic, closed-in individualism, the kind of individualism we've got in the late capitalist, neoliberal, consumerist world we've got, where it's all about the individual. But Imaoka's turn inwards immediately comes out everywhere. And I was struck, I was reading some of the, listening to some of the NAUA. Oh, no, it wasn't. Is it called the I've forgotten the name of the fellowship up in Washington State, the NAUA. There's a newish one.
That's the Salish Sea.
Salish, yeah, where Peter Morales gave that talk where he was talking about the need for people to find communities and come in and start with that. And I think Imaoka Shin'ichiro, Imaoka-sensei, is recognizing that need. And so the center of gravity of the community is an understanding of the individual that's always looking to the other. And as George says, if you're just educating yourself, you can't just educate yourself. It's this process. So I think that's the theological heart where these start and try to address what you're talking about, John. Did he succeed himself? He had a tricky time. I'm not sure he did in his own community, but that was the hope.
Okay, I think Calvin has his hand up.
I do, yes. Thank you. And thank you, Andrew, for a most illuminating talk, and to George for all the work that you've done in this area. I guess I have one kind of a larger question and one technical one. We'll put the second one to the end in case let others speak. But it's about that eternal divide between the religious and the secular. And you gave us great pains to talk about the struggle that Imaoka-sensei had with the language and to be particular and also to embrace the general. I'm wondering how that beyond his writing translated into work that he did in the wider world in a kind of an organizational sense, in bridging that divide from let's call it the liberal religious, if you like, to what we might call the liberal secular, the humanists, and how his message did or has resonated, and how that might continue in today's world.
No, that's a great question. Fortunately, I can respond in a very practical way. When I was started translating Imaoka Shinichiro's essays, I mean, it's a big thing. You can see it's 12-point type on British A4, so it's a lot, right? So it took a long time. And the essay that I put off to the very end, I thought, oh, it's not really going to be very interesting, was something called Greater Tokyo as an Educational Environment. So it was the very last thing I did. And it's turned out to be almost the most practical thing I've seen from his work that I think we could all run with in one way or another. In the chat, I will put a link to a short piece I've just written about it. So you can, there it is. It should come to everybody, but I'll quickly tell everybody. You don't need to read it now. That's ridiculous. That would be ridiculous. What Imaoka Shin'ichiro did, in answer to your question, was that when he was principal of Seisuko Academy, 1925, he's busily looking to develop something he calls integrated education. Lots of people have thought about that. But what he quickly realized was it couldn't happen in the classroom alone. It had to extend more broadly. So in 1934, he started to develop a project. It was one thing I don't know, and it'll be lovely to find out, is how often it was done, whether it was spread widely after 1934 or not. So I don't know what happened in Tokyo. So put that to one side. All I do know is that having expressed this at an international conference just a few days ago, I've got a few people interested in saying, hey, that's a really cool idea. What he did was this. He recognized, as I say, that Tokyo was a wider educational possibility. And he needed to get his students out into the world, but he didn't want to turn them into simply that school trip that becomes really like sightseeing. Yeah, we all go and it's lovely. We have tea and sandwiches and we all take a few photos and that's it. He had the brilliant idea of drawing on an old Buddhist pilgrimage down to the southwest of him, which visited 33 temples of the Bodhisattva Kannon, Kannon, the Bodhisattva of compassion. Okay. And like all of these pilgrimages, people went round to see the different to see the different Kannon figures. They got a stamp book, bunk, and then it was signed by the chief priest. Ancient thing. He said, whoa, why don't we pick this up and do it in Tokyo, but not just for religious Shinto shrines, Buddhist shrines, imperial shrines, religious shrines. We'll go to the local government offices. We'll go to museums. We'll go to factories. We'll go to newspapers. We'll go to the airport. We'll go to the sewage plant. We'll go to the observatory, the airport, the port, right? I mean, you can extend it. You can read the whole list. And what he was encouraged, you did the homework. The kids did the homework at school and then went out with their pilgrim books. And they went to these different sites, got them stamped and got it signed by the people who worked in these different secular and sacred environments. And the whole idea that Imaoka-sensei seems to have is that what he's trying to show people is this cooperative society. That we can't operate unless the sewage people are doing this. We can't operate unless we're doing this. We can't operate this. And because it went to the port and the airport, it's also got the international perspective. And he doesn't say it explicitly in this piece he wrote, but it's quite clear to me that he's hoping his students will infer that everybody, secular and sacred, because it's if you like, a secular but still sacred pilgrimage, right? That each person, whether they're a minister of state working in education doing this or in the sewage plant, each of them are bodhisattvas of compassion of the res publica, the public good. Wow. And I think it's such a beautiful idea, and it's so practical. And if I may, this isn't Imaoka's idea, but I'll leave you with this one image that I got from another conference I was at where I talked about this. You'll all be aware that a fungi is the mycelium mostly. Yeah, it's that massive network under the ground. Yeah, the mushrooms, the fungi, are the fruiting bodies. Yeah, but people mistake the fruiting bodies for the thing itself. I suddenly realized that's a great image for what Imaoka Shin'ichiro was trying to do. He was trying to point to the mycelium, this network of secular, sacred, all this stuff that pops up with a fruiting body here as a Shinto shrine, that pops up as a fruiting body like this as a newspaper, and so on and so forth. And his pilgrimage was to get his students to recognize that. A secular, sacred pilgrimage. There you go.
Thank you for the answers and thank you for the imagery. It's a great takeaway. Thank you.
What was your technical question?
Very quickly, it speaks to the kind of the same point in the 1973 Statement of Faith. I think it's point number 8. the English translation is talking about moving towards a universal and ultimate truth. And I'm just wondering if there's some subtleties in the language that might give some insight into that.
Well, I'm not your man for that, because I'm not. I mean, because my Japanese is almost non-existent. This is a combination of working with large language AI models, both ChatGPT, DeepL, plus my Japanese friends, plus knowing the secondary literature, plus knowing George. Yeah. So although I've gone through this very carefully, often phrase by phrase, so I can answer somewhat meaningfully to your question, one of the hopes later on is we get a hyper good English Japanese speaker, can speak both, to get even more deeply into these nuances. But I think the key thing is to, in that passage that I was talking about, it's moving towards, it's as if. So it's not you're not converging on an absolute truth. What you've got, I think the best way to describe this is to talk about, in the old days, we had that teleological thing of, we start here and we know where the good is. His isn't quite like that. What his thinking gives you is directionality. Your creativity is sort of drawing you on with a certain kind of momentum, as if towards. So I think it's really important to see he's not trying to converge on a final iteration of what the good, let's use Plato's language. I'm not sure it's entirely right, but the good, true, and the beautiful. It's not that they exist out there. It's that they've kind of got there's something in the way we move together allows these things to emerge. And then you get a sense of direction, meaning, attainment, but without absolutes. But you kind of get the
key word I think I'm hearing is emergent.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you.
And the meaning is also emergent in there, so it gives a sense of gravity and direction and meaning. So it's not just flapping all over the place. It could go there, it could go there. It could, but that's not how it's lived. The lived experience is of direction, attainment, improvement, building. So, yeah.
Gotcha. Thank you for that.
Andrew, I think I'm the only one with my hand up at the moment.
Okay, go for it. Yeah, Stephen, please.
Okay. This is perhaps a bit provocative. Here in North America, in 1961, when the Unitarians and Universalists merged for the next 50 years, they sought about trying to figure out some theology that would work, and ultimately I think the last serious effort was probably ended in about 2007 with this report entitled "Engaging Our Theological Diversity." I think after this report was written, they largely gave up and turned toward what was described in the 2012 Berry Street essay by Frederick Muir as fairly giving up on theology and going into politics and social action of various and sundry types. And Peter Morales will be talking about whether liberal religion can survive, or is it moribund? And I'm just wondering whether the concept of free religion gives us a potential way for Unitarianism, Unitarian Universalism, liberal religion to find its footing again. And perhaps you and George might share some of your ideas on that. Is there a possibility that we can find our theological footing again, because it's not, in my opinion, it's not there right now?
Yeah, I can respond. I'm not going to use the language of answer because, of course, it's not for me as a Brit to tell anybody what to do in the US about it, but I can make some, what's the word? Hopefully provide some useful thoughts on the table. But George, did you want to go first or not? I mean, by all means, just say no if not.
I will, but I will speak as a historian of religion from the point of view that Western religion has locked itself into a belief-centered approach. What we believe, and then we get into the trouble of relativity of belief and deceitfulness of language. I spent a year working on language theory. Now that I'm retired, I can do whatever study I want, or I could for a while. Now I can't because I've got a job. But let me come at it from this way. And personally, as a historian of religion, I thought that IARF and the UUA was going to be a place of interreligious dialogue. But I found that my UU friends were the least interested in learning from Asian religion. And one of the reasons is Asian religion that remains religion and not business religion or becomes belief religion is experientially focused. It is in practice, and what have you experienced? And the experience supports the beliefs. And so that's how wisdom appears. But wisdom is developmental. It develops and it accumulates, and there can be some subtractions from it in a particular period. It is not wise to teach that anymore. And so this kind of experiential focus away from what do we believe and the principles that we've gathered from the belief traditions of the world, we put those into a belief basket. Well, that is not what Imaoka was about. His first breakthrough was beginning to learn meditation, but he did not make meditation the center of his spirituality. He laughed and he said, well, I meditate for about 15 minutes at the beginning of the morning for the last 90 years. And then when I come out of that meditation, I have a clear direction for the day's work. And so even meditation was practical. And he made sure that no one put special kind of beliefs or experiences that marked development or enlightenment. He would not allow anyone to ascribe those kinds of experiences to him. He did not claim to be enlightened, but he was an exemplar that I searched for. I searched in India as my specialization. I was very confident in India as I worked there and was recognized as an Indian historian of Indian Renaissance religion. But when I got to Japan, I found that when the essays that I was able to gather, I asked for Japanese to translate them. His use of the ancient forms coming directly from Chinese were so frightening that I could not get an editor to translate anything for me. He gave up immediately. There were 3 Japanese specialist in Collegium, the Association for Liberal Studies. They also gave up on the project. A specialist who could translate everything gave up on the project because he did not see what Imaoka was about and free religion. In free religion, it is and here's where Andrew has made his second great contribution. Besides working with AI and translating all of this, the second was in English, putting a hyphen between free and religion. And now it's not an oxymoron anymore. Freedom and binding in beliefs and whatever creates an oxymoron. And the religion of freedom that was taken to Japan took something of our Enlightenment individualism to Japan, which is a cancer, because it would break down the community that Japan felt that was the most characteristic aspect of their civilization. They had become civilized. They had given up war and aggression, they thought, until it was then reintroduced from the samurai class that always wanted to remain warrior. So anyway, I've moved way beyond your very, very provocative question to try and paint a broader picture that the redemption of the UUA of Unitarianism will not be going back into an ism. It will be learning liberation that is and here's the Japanese term that Andrew and I are worried over, the essence of all true religion is its liberating quality. And so that's where UUs need to go, into the practices that liberate, the teachings that liberate, the communities that liberate, secular or religious, and learn how to see those liberating forces.
Thank you. Yeah. May I still chip in? Thank you, George. So I echo nothing that George said. I want to push against in any shape or form. So I'll do it in a form of little bullet points, although, my handwriting is just, crazy. They're not bullet points, but essence. George talks about essence. I think it's quite helpful in however the North American liberal churches begin to think about things. I think one idea to hang on to and work with would be this idea of the mycelium, not as an essence like the old Platonic essence, but if one has a sense that the scare quotes essence of liberal religion is this constant binding underneath that then pops up in these fruiting bodies. So we stop thinking about old school philosophical essences and start seeing kind of networks of connectivity that fruit like this here and fruit like this here. Sometimes they look Christian, sometimes they look Buddhist. We don't have to worry about what we're worried about is, are these fruiting bodies connecting? So I think that's one thing. I think it's a helpful idea. The other thing here in the UK that I always push against, and I would suggest it's worth thinking that it's worth pushing against, is any continued use of Unitarianism. Ism is a real problem. Imaoka Shin'ichiro did not like ism. I've consistently now, it's fine to talk about Unitarianism historically. There was an ism in the 16th, 17th, and into the 18th century. You could frame it as an ism, but as we've moved into the contemporary world, it's not I don't think it's an ism. So I now only talk about in the modern context, the tradition. That's the first thing, this liberative tradition, this Unitarian tradition. The second thing to add to that in my bullet points is when I'm thinking about a tradition, it's a procession. Wendell Berry, I'm sure many of you will know Wendell Berry's work, an American author, farmer, thinker. He talks about procession consciousness. When the procession ends, so too does the consciousness, the memory. So we're trying to move forward in a procession. It's not an ism. Another good illustration, you can pen these down from the recording. Wittgenstein pointed this out. Think of a rope that's tying a ship to the harbor. It's tempting in our mindset, the one we've inherited, to think that there's a single thread going through them all, a golden thread. We hear that language all the time, a golden thread, unbroken, all that language. Think of a rope, a hemp rope. There is no single thread. It's all overlapping fibers. It's all overlapping movements that take us from where we were into the future. So again, you get rid of this single essence. You see it as overlapping relationships. I think that's helpful. Then the last thing I would want to say, and I can draw you a little diagram about this, is there's a relatively recent modern philosophical school of thought or way of thinking called a philosophy of movement. And a philosophy of movement essentially is saying what it is for anything to be the thing it is to be something in motion. Okay? There is nothing that's static. It's always in motion. Ethics, therefore, can be framed as not an absolute set of rules from outside. Ethics is about learning to move well together. Go back to his image of the pilgrimage. That's moving well together. That's creating overlapping fibers of seeing how we're connected and seeing there's a mycelium. So that's something, and it's always moving. It's always creative. So it's never finished. And remember his idea of self, other, and cooperative society. That's a moving thing as well. Right, my two final things, and then I'll stop. There's a wonderful, wonderful poem. Some of you may know it by, I'll share screen because it's easier. Poetry. It's very short. It's not a difficult poem. But let's see if I can get it up for you. It is worth it. Trust me. Well, trust me. I'm a minister of religion. What could go wrong? Here we are. Share. No, you can't see any of that, can you?
Yes.
Oh, can you see the poem?
Need to scroll down. Yeah.
You have to scroll down a little bit.
Oh, scroll down a little bit. Okay, yeah, there it is. Right. A.R. Ammons. He's often described as America's Lucretius. I think this is a really, really, really important way of understanding motion. And then I'll draw my final image in a second. Taking root in windy sand is not an easy way to go about finding a place to stay. A ditch bank or wood's edge has firmer ground. In a loose world, though, something can be started. A root touch water, a tip break sand. Mounds from that can rise on held mounds. A gesture of building, keeping, a trapping into shape. Firm ground is not available ground. Now, my final image, and then I'll shut up. These are just things maybe to run with. The best image of these things, think of a whirlpool. A whirlpool is a really interesting thing. It exists by dint of it being created by needing energy and water coming into it and constantly circling. If the movement stops, the whirlpool disappears. Yeah? A human being is like that. When the energy stops coming in and going round, it disappears. An institution is like that. But while it's doing that, the language is meta-stable. It's got a sort of strong quality about it. So strong sometimes, especially in churches, that we think, here's the little draw, hang on, I know I've got the wrong setting. It'll be all blurry. Hang on, background effects, portrait lighting off. That's going to be better. Here's the little drawing. A circle with a dot in the middle. We tend to think that this is what institutions like, or what the world's like, that the center, the still center, the absolute, the moral absolutes, God, all those things are in the center, and it defines the edge. Everything else is peripheral, the center, right? That's the model of the world that I think classic Unitarianism has had, and I do mean ism, remember, in this instance, and indeed most religions. Okay, it looks like it's still and stable and finished. Now, let me just change it. If you now see, if you turn that outside circle now into a flow coming from the left, and it loops up and round the middle and then shoots out the other side, you begin to see that centers, like June's, like dear old Ammons's idea, movement is what creates stability. Movement is what creates the center. And again, I think that's really what Imaoka Shin'ichiro had recognized, that these structures that we value, which feel strong and sometimes inevitable, are always created by movement, flow. And that's it. That's all I want to add to the table of thinking, to move away from that old Enlightenment, strong, stable absolutes, into a much more movement-orientated way of thinking about liberal religion.
Thank you, Andrew. Marga Hanna from Vancouver has a question. I think it should be our last.
There's also one I've got in the chat.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Well, Marga's had her hand up.
Yep.
So
Yep.
Marga, why don't you go ahead, and then we'll deal with the chat question. Marga?
Okay, I'm not for sure going to be as eloquent as Andrew. I really appreciate what you said. But my thoughts are, it seems to me that the core and most attractive characteristic of Imaoka is his constant curiosity and humility embedded in open thought and searching constantly. I am immediately attractive to a person like that. I feel that I could go to him with any question and have it answered, and know that it would be continuous, like your wheel indicates, Andrew. And I also believe deeply in what he says, that the whole of life and nature, and the knowledge that you are one with your neighbor seems central to his thinking. It's what Buddhists believe. It's embedded in Eastern mythology and religion. It immediately makes me feel included, that people would be curious about the ideas I have and embed them in their own thoughts. I feel, especially at this moment, that Western religion, along with politics, has become highly competitive, antagonistic, almost the exact opposite to free religion, as you know, I hear from Imaoka. The rhetoric is often, especially in the local churches, often adversarial and combative. So I have a question. Is the place now for understanding the essence of free religion really only in the church spaces, or should it really now take place in the sewage station. That has come up before, in the sewage station, on the street, in the art galleries, in creative thinking. I'm teaching giving a seminar on the creative journey, and I am astounded what these paintings that people are doing, what they embody, where these could be places where average person can come to share their ideas of what the world could be inspired by, what would nourish their soul. We've forgotten the common folk. And somebody said that Unitarian Church has become a social club, and I have to sort of think about that. And it seems to me, yes, that may be true. What has nourished the average person? What has nourished their soul in the past? And what has harmed their soul? All these questions would be relevant to me.
Thank you, Margaret. That again, that's a fantastic question. They've all wonderful questions to receive. I want to affirm. I think yes. I think this is the point of Imaoka Shin'ichiro, Imaoka-sensei, that free religion can be found everywhere, really everywhere, and that's a really important task of any form of free religion, to be able to teach that. But what Imaoka Shin'ichiro, Imaoka-sensei, was always absolutely clear about is you can't live that whole thing. He was always concerned about bouncing between the universal and the particular. And again, I draw often on my experience as a jazz bass player, which is the world of jazz is huge. It can go all the way from New Orleans jazz through to Duke Ellington into the sort of bebop era and so on and so forth. But no musician really understands how to play all those forms. We understand this network underneath, but we have to choose a particular. We need the particular. So Imaoka Shinichiro's idea was always, that's why he talks about, I believe, in the Kyokai, this holding together, this wider community, but I also believe in specific religion. And that's one of the reasons why I think he didn't want to collapse all the different religious traditions to a single one, because back to the image of the mycelium and the fruiting bodies, the beautiful thing about this free religious connectivity is it can fruit differently. We don't have to worry about whether our free religious communities look Jewish or Christian or Muslim or this, that, and the other. The question is, are they teaching the kind of religion you're talking about, Margaret? And I think that's what he was always focusing on. And those churches that come out of the Unitarian and Universalist traditions more widely have got a particular specific flavor. Did have, might have, could have, should have, all those things. But I would add, to help, remember George very kindly gave me a thumbs up to translating jiyu shukyo when I use free religion as a hyphenated word. I think and he sort of hinted at it, well, he did hint at it, that remember the etymology of religion, this religio, this holding together, this community binding, it needn't be a doctrinal, rigid one. When it's absolutely attached to the word religion, like the Germans can do all the time, I wish we could just bolt all those things together. Free religion etymologically means that which holds us together in community, the religio, is that which frees us. That's the binding thing. As long as the practices free us, that's what will hold us together. And then you're back at the image of the pilgrimage, I think, as a way of doing what you said, that free religion is everywhere, in the sewage plant, in the temple, in this. That's his ideal. But I think it's real. Question is how to do it ourselves.
Well, I think this is probably a good time to thank Andrew. I know there may be
question.
I think there's just a comment
Okay.
there. And
Oh, yeah.
because we've gone on quite a while, and I would like to give people a bit of time to chat in the breakout rooms,
Yep.
if they so desire.